At the edge of the Nile Valley, where the cliffs withdraw into pale desert and the river leaves a green strip of life behind it, a dead city lies under a skin of dust. It does not rise like Thebes, crowded with temples and royal names. It does not tower like Giza, built to survive in stone. It is flatter, quieter, easier to miss. Low lines of mud brick break the surface. Wind moves through empty streets that were once planned with royal certainty. The sun falls hard across foundations, courtyards, ovens, workshops, and vanished walls. Here, in the middle of Egypt, a pharaoh tried to remake the world around a single god of light. Here, that same world later tried to remove him from memory. The place is Amarna, ancient Akhenaten, the horizon of the Aten. Even its name feels like a line drawn between earth and sky. It was not meant to be an ordinary capital. It was founded as a sacred stage, a new beginning, a city where the royal family could stand beneath the open sun and claim direct closeness to the divine disk. Yet the strange power of Amarna comes not only from what Akhenaten built, but from how quickly it was rejected after him. The city did not become the eternal heart of Egypt. It became a scar. Its temples were dismantled, its blocks were reused, its royal names were hacked away. Its founder, once presented as the chosen servant of the Aten, became a figure later kings preferred to pass over in silence. And still, the silence does not hold. In recent field seasons, archaeologists continue to return to Amarna, not to chase a supernatural curse or a hidden chamber of impossible secrets, but to do something quieter and more powerful to read what survives. They record the remains of mud brick houses before erosion and modern pressure damaged them further. They study the ruined villa of an official who once served the royal court. They examined fragments from the great Aten temple, cemeteries used for only a short span of years, animal bones, craft debris, broken reliefs, and the ordinary matter of a city built too quickly and abandoned too soon. The work is patient, almost opposite in spirit to the drama of the story. Yet each measurement, each cleaned surface, each mapped wall makes the ancient erasure less complete. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. Because this is not only the story of a pharaoh with an erased name, it is the story of how memory can be attacked, how power can rewrite the past, and how, after more than 3,000 years, small fragments can begin to speak again. Akhenaten was not forgotten by accident. That is the first unsettling fact. Many ancient rulers vanish because time is stronger than stone, because floods, sand, fire, reuse, poverty, and conquest consume what they leave behind. But Akhenaten belongs to a different category. His disappearance from official memory was shaped by intention. His reign was treated not merely as an old chapter, but as a disturbance. In later royal lists, the line of kings could be smoothed over as if the Amarna period had been an interruption best ignored. Names associated with the Aten revolution were damaged. Faces were cut away. Monuments were pulled down. The goal was not simply to clear building material or make room for new kings, though that happened too. In Egyptian thought, a name was not just a label, it was part of existence. To preserve a name was to allow a person to endure. To destroy it was a political act, a religious act, and, in a deep sense, an attack on eternity. That is why Amarna feels so strange. It is both an archaeological site and the remains of a broken argument. On one side stands Akhenaten's vision, a new capital, a new emphasis on the Aten, new artistic forms, a new arrangement of royal and divine power. On the other side stands the restoration that followed the return to older gods, especially Amun, the reassertion of temples and priesthoods, the attempt to repair the symbolic order that Akhenaten had disrupted. The desert between them is not empty, it is full of evidence, but the evidence remains incomplete. What survives in the record suggests a revolution with real consequences, yet scholars still debate how far Akhenaten's reforms reached into daily life, how much ordinary Egyptians understood or accepted them, and whether his religious program was a sincere spiritual transformation, a political consolidation, or both at once. The city itself gives the first clues. Akhenaten was built on land that Akhenaten claimed had not belonged to another god, another temple, or another sacred tradition. That claim matters. Egypt was an old civilization by his time, already ancient in its own eyes. Its temples were not just places of worship, they were estates, employers, granaries, treasuries, archives, ritual engines, and centers of social power. To step away from Thebes and establish a new capital in a fresh desert bay was not simply a change of address. It was a statement that the old networks could be bypassed. It was an attempt to place kingship, ritual, art, administration, and divine access into a new frame, with Akhenaten and his family standing at the center. But the ground at Amarna also tells a more human story than royal ideology ever intended. Beneath the broad idea of a sunlit city are the remains of neighborhoods, kitchens, storage rooms, animal pens, workspaces, and narrow streets. There were officials with large homes and people of lower status in simpler dwellings. There were craftsmen shaping glass, faience, stone, and metal. There were labourers whose bones suggest strain and hard work. There were cemeteries that belong not to eternal pharaohs, but to the people who lived and died during the brief life of the city. This is one of the lesser-known forces of Amarna. It pulls the story down from the blazing disk in the sky and places it back among human bodies, tools, dust, hunger, duty, skill, and fatigue. That makes Akhenaten harder to reduce to a single image. He's often remembered as the heretic Pharaoh, the strange king with the long face, the husband of Nefertiti, the ruler who lifted the Aten above the old gods. Those images are not wrong, but they are too narrow. He was also a builder of an experimental capital, a ruler operating inside a wealthy empire, a son of one of Egypt's most powerful dynasties, and a man whose choices touched priests, officials, artists, soldiers, foreign vassals, workmen, and families far beyond the palace. His religious revolution had architecture. It had supply chains. It had workshops. It had guards. It had letters arriving from abroad. It had people waking before dawn in a city that existed because one king had decided that Egypt's relationship with the divine must be remade. The irony is sharp. Akhenaten tried to control memory by redirecting devotion toward the Aten and by diminishing older divine names, especially those connected with Amun. Then, after his death, Egypt answered him in the same language. The kingdom restored what he had challenged, and his own name became dangerous. The erasure was not perfect, because no erasure ever is. It left cracks. Reused stone blocks preserved broken scenes. Desert foundations preserved the plan of his city. Tomb inscriptions, diplomatic tablets, art objects, boundary stelae, and damaged reliefs kept pieces of the story alive. Later archaeology did not discover a clean, complete biography. It found wreckage, and from wreckage it began to reconstruct a life. At Amarna, the landscape helps explain why the story lingers. The cliffs curve around the site like a natural boundary. The desert is open, severe, and exposed. The light can feel absolute. It is easy to understand why a king obsessed with the visible sun might choose this place, and just as easy to understand why later Egyptians might have found it unbearable. There is little softness in the setting. It does not hide the city's failure. The abandoned streets do not suggest a slow, ordinary urban decline. They suggest an idea cut short. Yet that too must be handled carefully. The city was abandoned, but not necessarily in a single night of panic. Claims of mysterious plague or sudden divine punishment are tempting, because they make the story simpler and darker. But the latest archaeological and bioarchaeological work urges caution. There is evidence of hardship, labour stress, and a short-lived population, but no single explanation fully accounts for Amarna's end. And the strongest picture is political and religious rather than supernatural. Akhenaten collapsed because the royal project behind it lost authority. When the king who embodied the system was gone, the system could not easily survive him. So the story begins not with a monster, and not with a saint, but with a place where memory was wounded. Amarna is the crime scene and the archive at once. It preserves the ambition of a ruler who tried to reorder heaven, and the reaction of a civilization that decided his name should not remain whole. In the bright emptiness of the site, one can almost feel the contradiction: a city built for the sun, remembered through shadows, a pharaoh erased from official memory, restored by fragments, a name once too dangerous to speak, now returning slowly from mud brick, bone, broken stone, and dust. Before the city in the desert has a name, before the temples open themselves to the sun, before the face of Amun is cut from sacred places, and before Akhenaten's own memory is wounded in return, there is a prince born into one of the most brilliant courts Egypt has ever known. He does not enter history as Akhenaten. He enters it as Amenhotep, a name already heavy with meaning, a name tied to the god Amun, the hidden one, the great divine power of Thebes. Amenhotep means, in essence, that Amun is satisfied. It is a name that places the young prince inside the old order from the first breath of his royal identity. Nothing about it suggests rebellion. Nothing about it warns that this child, raised beneath the gold and ritual of the 18th dynasty, will one day try to turn Egypt's religious world toward a different centre. The Egypt into which Amenhotep IV is born is not weak, isolated or primitive. It is rich, confident, and astonishingly connected. His father, Amenhotep III, presides over a kingdom that glows with imperial wealth. Nubian gold flows north. Luxury goods pass through diplomatic networks. Foreign rulers write to Egypt with respect, frustration, flattery, and need. Monumental building reaches a scale meant to impress not only subjects, but eternity itself. The court is full of ceremony, refined art, royal women of great influence, officials whose careers depend on proximity to the throne, and priests whose temples hold land, labour, and sacred authority. The young prince grows up inside a world where religion and politics cannot be separated, because every ritual helps keep the cosmos in order, and every temple is also a structure of power. This matters because Akhenaten is sometimes imagined as if he simply appears from nowhere, strange and fully formed, already standing outside Egyptian tradition. The surviving evidence does not support such a simple picture. He emerges from the heart of that tradition. He inherits its language, its kingship, its ceremonial habits, its wealth, and its confidence that the pharaoh stands between gods and human beings. The revolution that later makes him infamous is not the act of an outsider invading Egypt's belief system. It is an internal rupture. It comes from within the palace, from a man whose legitimacy depends on the same sacred monarchy he begins to transform. His father's reign may already contain hints of the path ahead, though scholars still debate how direct that connection should be. The solar aspect of kingship had long been important in Egypt, and Amenhotep III's court gave great prominence to royal divinity, light, jubilee renewal, and the visible power of the sun. The Aten, the sun disk, was not invented by Akhenaten. It existed before him as part of Egypt's religious vocabulary. What changes later is emphasis, exclusivity, and political force. This is one of the subtler points in the story. Akhenaten's revolution does not begin as a completely foreign idea dropped into Egypt. It grows from possibilities already present, then pushes them to an extreme that the wider system cannot absorb. When Amenhotep IV becomes king, the early signs are not yet the full break. He rules at first from within recognizable Egyptian frameworks. The old temples still stand. The great god Amun is still woven into royal identity. The city of Thebes remains sacred and powerful. Yet the young king quickly begins to favor the Aten in ways that feel more than decorative. He sponsors new building projects. He changes ritual emphasis. He gives the sun disk a role of increasing centrality. In the first years of his reign, the old and the new seem to coexist uneasily, like two voices speaking in the same chamber, one ancient and deep, the other brighter, sharper, and increasingly unwilling to remain secondary. Then comes the name change. Around the 5th year of his reign, Amenhotep IV becomes Akhenaten. It is difficult to overstate how dramatic this is in Egyptian terms. A royal name is not casual. It is not a fashion. It is a theological statement, a public identity, a piece of the king's living relationship with the divine. By removing the reference to Amun and taking a name connected to the Aten, the king does more than rebrand himself. He announces that the foundation of his kingship has shifted. The man once named for Amun now presents himself as effective for the Aten, useful to the Aten, acting for the Aten. The old name belongs to a world he is leaving behind. The new name declares the direction of travel. There is a quiet violence in that transformation, even before any stone is cut or any old divine name is attacked. Amenhotep is not simply replaced by Akhenaten. A whole symbolic ancestry is being challenged. The god whose priesthood has become one of the most powerful institutions in Egypt is displaced from the king's own name. The change says that the king's deepest loyalty is no longer phrased through Amun. To modern ears, it may sound like a personal religious decision. In ancient Egypt, it is much more than that. It touches legitimacy, temple wealth, official careers, ritual schedules, artistic programs, and the invisible architecture by which Egyptians understand cosmic stability. The surprising detail is that this transformation unfolds in stages. Akhenaten does not begin by burning down the whole old order in a single gesture. The evidence suggests a process, intensifying over time. Early Aten temples may be raised even within traditional sacred landscapes. The new solar cult is first elevated, then protected, then made increasingly dominant. The king does not merely worship Aten, he redefines how divine access works. The older gods recede, and in the most radical form of the program, the king and royal family become the necessary channel through which the Aten's life-giving force reaches the human world. The sun shines on everyone, but its religious meaning is mediated through Akhenaten. That is where the danger lies. The change is not only about belief, it reorganizes access. Traditional temples depend on cult statues housed in dark sanctuaries. attended by priests, awakened, washed, dressed, fed, and carried in festivals. Their power is enclosed, ritualized, and ancient. Akhenaten's Aten is different in presentation. The god is visible as the disk of the sun, radiating down into open courts. The architecture of Aten worship favors exposure rather than shadow, offering tables rather than hidden chambers, direct light rather than sacred darkness. It looks, at first, like simplification, but it may also concentrate authority. If the Aten is approached most properly through the king, then the king's body, family, image, and words become the central religious machinery. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate Akhenaten's motives. Some see him as a religious visionary, deeply committed to a new understanding of divine reality. Some emphasize politics, especially the desire to weaken entrenched temple powers. Others see an inseparable mixture, because ancient rulers rarely divided spiritual conviction from authority in the way modern observers might prefer. What survives in the record suggests that Akhenaten's revolution was not merely cynical, but neither was it harmless idealism. It was a royal project that changed institutions, art, urban planning, names, and memory. Its beauty and severity belong together. There is also the question of personality, which has tempted writers for generations. Akhenaten's unusual images, his intense religious focus, and the later hostility toward his reign have encouraged theories about illness, fanaticism, deformity, or psychological disturbance. Many of these claims reach far beyond the evidence. The safer truth is stranger because it is less neat. We do not need to diagnose Akhenaten to understand why he frightened later Egypt. A king did not have to be mad to be dangerous. He only had to disturb the system that made the world feel secure. By taking the name Akhenaten, the prince of the old order becomes the author of a break. The change is both personal and national, both devotional and administrative. It marks the moment when a royal experiment begins to harden into a revolution. Behind the name stands a young ruler shaped by Egypt's wealth, by his father's solar grandeur, by a court used to absolute ceremony, and by a religious imagination that sees the sun not as one god among many, but as the overwhelming source of life. Ahead of the name waits a city not yet fully built, a queen who will become one of the most recognizable faces of the ancient world, an art style that will unsettle later viewers, and a campaign of erasure that will try to make this reign look like a wound cut out of history. The boy named for Amun has become the man of Aten, and Egypt, though it does not yet know the full cost, has begun to turn toward the horizon. The horizon toward which Egypt now turns is not empty. It is filled with light, and in Akhenaten's imagination that light is no longer simply one divine presence among many. It becomes the center around which kingship, worship, art, and truth must be arranged. The Aten is visible to every eye, rising over the cliffs, pouring heat across the Nile fields, touching palace roofs, temple courts, animal backs, workers' shoulders, and the faces of the royal family. Unlike Amun, whose very name suggests hiddenness, the Aten is not concealed in a dark sanctuary. It cannot be locked inside a shrine. It cannot be carried out by priests in a festival procession as a sacred statue. It appears above all things, unavoidable, immense, and indifferent to human preference. Akhenaten takes this visible force and turns it into a religious revolution. Before him, the Aten is not unknown. Egyptian religion has long honored the sun in many forms, and solar theology reaches deep into the Old Kingdom and beyond. Ra, Harakti, Khepri, Atum, and other divine expressions of the sun belong to a vast and flexible sacred world. Egyptian religion is not a simple list of gods, each sealed off from the others. It is layered, fluid, and comfortable with overlapping identities. A god can merge with another god. A local cult can rise in national importance. A royal ideology can emphasize one divine force without denying every other power in existence. This is why Akhenaten's shift is so difficult to explain in modern terms. It is not strange because he notices the sun. Egypt has always noticed the sun. It is strange because he begins to narrow the religious field around it with increasing force. The Aten of Akhenaten's mature reign is represented not as a human-bodied god sitting on a throne, but as a disk sending rays downward. Those rays often end in tiny hands, and some hold the ankh, the sign of life, toward the king and his family. The image is simple at first glance, almost serene. Light descends, life is given, the royal family receives it. Yet this simplicity hides a profound change. If the Aten's blessing reaches Egypt most clearly through Akhenaten, then the king is not merely one ritual servant among many. He becomes the essential interpreter of the divine. The old temple system, with its many gods, priesthoods, sacred statues, and inherited rites, is pushed aside by a more concentrated arrangement. The sun may shine everywhere, but in the official art of the new religion, its intimate life-giving touch is focused on the king, the queen, and their household. That is why Amun matters so much in this story. Amun is not just another god who happens to lose favour. By the time of Akhenaten, Amun of Thebes stands at the centre of one of Egypt's most powerful religious and economic institutions. His temples command wealth, land, offerings, labour, and prestige. The priesthood of Amun is woven into the structure of the state. The great temple complex at Karnak is not only a sacred place, it is an engine of influence. To reduce Amun's role is to disturb more than theology. It affects property, offices, ritual authority, artistic patronage, and the political balance between temple and throne. Akhenaten's elevation of the Aten therefore carries a sharp institutional edge. The revolution in heaven has consequences on the ground. At first, the older order does not vanish. Religious change in Egypt can be gradual, and early in Akhenaten's reign there are still continuities with established tradition. But as the Aten rises, other gods fall under pressure. The name of Amun is attacked in some places. Images are removed or damaged. Old divine phrases are altered. This is one of the most important reversals in the whole Amarna story before later Egypt tries to erase Akhenaten. Akhenaten himself participates in acts of erasure against older sacred names. In a culture where names carry life, presence, and endurance, this is not an ordinary theological disagreement. It is a struggle over who may exist in memory and ritual. The battle is fought in stone, ink, architecture, and official language. The force of that battle should not be exaggerated into a modern idea of pure monotheism without caution. Scholars still debate whether Akhenaten's religion should be called monotheistic, henotheistic, monolatrous, or something that does not fit neatly into later categories. He exalts the Aten in an unprecedented way and suppresses or sidelines many traditional gods. But the evidence remains incomplete, and ancient Egyptian theology does not map cleanly onto modern labels. What survives in the record suggests a radical narrowing of official worship rather than a philosophical manifesto in the modern sense. Akhenaten does not write like a later theologian trying to prove a universal doctrine. He acts like a king restructuring sacred order around the god he claims to know most directly. The temples of the Aten express this restructuring in physical form. They're open to the sky. Their courts receive sunlight. Instead of a single hidden cult statue deep in darkness, there are offering tables exposed beneath the disk. The atmosphere is different from the old temple drama of enclosure. Mystery and carefully controlled revelation. Aten worship turns upward. It depends on the visible path of light. This change can sound gentle when described abstractly, but it is also disruptive. Priests trained for one ritual world find themselves facing another. Artists must learn new conventions. Officials must phrase loyalty in new terms. The royal household becomes more central in sacred imagery than ever before. Even the daily movement of the sun is drawn into the king's political language. A lesser-known tension sits inside the beauty of this vision. The Aten may appear universal, shining over all lands, yet access to its official meaning becomes narrow. Ordinary Egyptians can see the sun, but the state religion presents Akhenaten as the one who truly understands the god. In some readings, the people worship the Aten through loyalty to the king, or worship the king as the one uniquely close to the Aten. No single explanation fully accounts for how this worked in everyday practice, and local households may have continued private habits that official monuments do not show. But the public message is unmistakable. The king stands at the center of divine contact. The old sacred plurality, with its many places of access, contracts toward one royal channel. This would have felt dangerous not only to priests but to memory itself. Egypt is a civilization of repetition. Its rituals renew the world because they are performed again and again. Its temples are covered with names because names must endure. Its dead require offerings, words, images, and remembrance. Its kings present themselves as heirs in an ancient chain, not as isolated inventors beginning from nothing. Akhenaten's reform cuts across that habit of sacred continuity. By changing his own name, moving religious focus away from Amun, reshaping temple architecture, and altering the language of worship, he creates the impression of a king willing to interrupt inherited order. To later Egyptians, this may have looked less like inspired reform than cosmic risk. And yet, the attraction of the Aten is understandable. The sun is immediate, it crosses borders, it does not need a mythic animal form or a hidden chamber to be felt. It warms crops, reveals colour, marks time, and returns each morning with terrifying reliability. Akhenaten's hymnic language, as far as it can be reconstructed from surviving texts, treats the Aten as the source of life for Egypt and foreign lands alike, for humans, animals, plants, and the daily awakening of creation. There is grandeur in that vision. There is also severity. A god who is everywhere in light can leave little room for the old sacred shadows. So the Aten rises above Egypt not merely as a disk, but as a challenge. Under its rays, the king's new identity becomes clearer. He's not content to be Amenhotep, servant of a system broad enough to hold Amun, Mut, Khonsu, Ptah, Osiris, Hathor, Thoth, and countless other divine powers. He becomes Akhenaten, the ruler who insists that the sun's visible life is the truth around which Egypt must gather. The old gods do not disappear from people's hearts in a single royal command, and the depth of private resistance remains difficult to measure. But at the level of state ideology, a line has been crossed. The hidden god of Thebes has been challenged by the blazing disk above the horizon, and a civilization built on sacred continuity begins to feel the pressure of a king who wants light to erase shadow. To build Akhenaten, Akhenaten does something that looks almost impossible in a civilization so deeply rooted in inherited places. He turns away from the old sacred centers and chooses a stretch of land that can be presented as untouched, unclaimed, and waiting. The desert bay at Amarna lies between the river and the cliffs, a broad sweep of pale ground where the eastern mountains rise like a wall behind the city. It is not Thebes, heavy with Amun. It is not Memphis, dense with older royal and administrative memory. It is not a place already crowded by the authority of previous kings. In Akhenaten's own ideology, this matters intensely. The new city must not feel like a compromise with the past. It must feel like a beginning. The choice of location is part of the message. The cliffs create a natural horizon, and in that horizon the Aten can rise with theatrical force. The king does not merely found a capital, he places a sacred image onto the landscape. Akhenaten means the horizon of the Aten, and the name turns geography into theology. Every sunrise becomes a kind of royal argument. The disk appears over the eastern cliffs, and below it stands a city designed to make the king's religious vision visible. It is difficult to know how ordinary inhabitants experience this symbolism day after day, but the official intention is clear enough. The city is built to say that a new relationship between Egypt, kingship, and the divine has begun. Boundary stelae cut into the surrounding cliffs mark the sacred territory. These inscriptions do more than define land. They dramatize possession, devotion, and royal will. Akhenaten presents the site as chosen for the Aten, and by extension for himself as the god's unique servant. In a country where older cities grow slowly over centuries, Akhenaten is planned with unusual speed and purpose. Streets, temples, palaces, administrative buildings, villas, work areas, and housing districts appear within a short reign. The speed itself is one of the city's hidden shocks. Akhenaten is not the patient accumulation of generations. It is a political and religious decision made in mud brick, limestone, paint, wood, and labour. The central zone of the city carries the grandest message. There are royal buildings, broad routes, ceremonial spaces, and temples dedicated to the Aten. These temples differ from the older temple tradition in ways that must have been visually striking. Instead of deep sanctuaries wrapped in darkness, the Aten's worship requires open courts flooded with light. Offering tables stand beneath the sky. The god is not hidden in a statue waiting inside a shrine. The god is the sun disk overhead, pouring radiance into the space. The architecture becomes an instrument of exposure. In older temples, sacred mystery is often approached by moving inward, from bright outer courts toward shadowed chambers. At Akhenaten, worship opens upward. This does not mean the city is simple. A capital has to function. It must feed people, house officials, organize supplies, receive messages, store goods, support craft production, and display hierarchy. Behind the clean symbolic image of a sun city is a complicated urban machine. Palaces and elite villas show the presence of high officials who followed the king into his experiment. Large houses stand with reception rooms, columned spaces, storerooms, kitchens, and private areas. Some buildings include painted floors and fragments of decoration that once created a world of colour now mostly lost. The desert ruins today look pale and stripped, but in their brief life they would have been animated by plaster, pigment, textiles, wood, shade, smoke, animals, and the movement of people. The city also contains the less glamorous structures that make royal visions possible. There are suburbs, workshops, storage areas, and workmen's communities. Archaeological study of Amarna's housing reveals a city of many social levels, not simply a royal stage. The remains of thousands of mud brick houses show how far the urban project extended beyond the palace. Some houses were spacious and carefully arranged, others were modest, built around the practical demands of daily survival. Their walls did not intend to preserve a theological revolution for 3,000 years. They are meant to hold roofs, keep out heat, store food, shelter families, and support ordinary tasks. That ordinary purpose is exactly what makes them so valuable now. A surprising detail about Amarna is how much of its historical power comes from mud brick. Stone monuments often dominate the imagination of Egypt, but Akhenaten's story survives in fragile material. Mud brick can melt back into the earth if left unprotected. It erodes under wind and rain. It is vulnerable to groundwater, modern expansion, and the slow pressure of time. Yet mud brick also preserves plans, footprints, and the shape of daily life. A wall only knee-high can still reveal a room. A room can reveal a household. A group of houses can reveal the structure of a city. The very material that makes Amarna vulnerable also makes it intimate. The Royal Road is one of the city's most evocative features. It links important zones and creates a route along which the king and royal family could appear. Movement through Akhenaten is not merely practical, it is ceremonial. The king's visibility matters. In the Aten religion, royal presence is sacred theatre. Akhenaten, Nefertiti, and their daughters are shown receiving the sun's rays, making offerings, riding in chariots, and inhabiting a world where family, kingship, and worship merge. The city's layout helps stage that theology. The ruler does not vanish into an old palace behind inherited walls. He moves through a capital built to frame him beneath the sun. Yet the city's planned quality should not be mistaken for complete order. No ancient city is only what its founder intends. People adapt spaces, officials compete, workers improvise, supplies fail or arrive late, animals wander, fires burn in kitchens, dust enters everything. The evidence remains incomplete, but what survives suggests that Akhenaten was both ideological and messy, both sacred plan and lived settlement. Its streets carried royal processions, but they also carried waste, deliveries, gossip, fatigue, and the ordinary pressure of a population suddenly gathered in a new place. This is where Akhenaten's ambition becomes almost physical. To challenge Amun in temple inscriptions is one thing, to build a new capital is another. A city requires bodies. It requires quarrying, brick-making, hauling, plastering, painting, carpentry, administration, food production, animal management, and constant repair. The Aten may shine from above, but Akhenaten rises because thousands of hands shape it from below. Every open-air temple depends on labour. Every palace wall depends on brickmakers. Every official residence depends on supply lines. The dream of a purified religious horizon is built through deeply earthly work. Scholars still debate how fully Akhenaten was meant to replace Egypt's older centres and how permanent Akhenaten imagined it to be. The king's language suggests sacred finality, as if this city is the true home of the Aten forever. History suggests something more fragile. The capital's life is brief, roughly the length of one political experiment. That brevity gives the ruins their strange intensity. Many ancient cities are hard to read because they are rebuilt again and again, layer upon layer, century after century. Amarna is different. Its short life freezes a moment of radical change. It is a city interrupted before it can become ordinary. By founding Akhenaten from nothing, Akhenaten creates the clearest expression of his reign. The city is his theology in streets and walls. It is his break with the old order made visible on the desert floor. It is also the reason later erasure can never fully succeed. A name can be cut from stone, a face can be damaged, a block can be dragged away and reused, but a whole city leaves a larger wound in the earth, even flattened, even abandoned, even misunderstood for centuries. Akhenaten remains. The sun city that was meant to proclaim a new eternity becomes, instead, the greatest witness to how quickly a royal dream can be built, and how quickly Egypt can decide that the dream must end. In the bright machinery of Akhenaten, Akhenaten does not stand alone. Beside him, again and again, appears Nefertiti, a queen whose face has become more famous than almost any royal woman in Egyptian history, though fame has not made her simple. She enters the Amarna story not as decoration, not as a silent figure placed politely behind the king, but as a presence of unusual visibility. In reliefs, temple scenes, domestic images, and royal compositions, she belongs to the same charged field of sunlight as Akhenaten himself. The rays of the Aten reach toward her. She makes offerings. She appears in ritual action. She rides in royal display. She stands within the new sacred order as though the revolution cannot be shown without her. That visibility is one of the most striking features of the Amarna period. Egyptian queens before Nefertiti could be powerful, prestigious, and ritually important. But the art of Akhenaten gives her an especially prominent place in the public theology of the reign. She is not merely the wife of the king in the background of a male drama. She is part of the image by which Aten worship is made visible. The royal family becomes a sacred sign, and within that sign Nefertiti is essential. The disk shines above, the rays descend, the king and queen receive life, the royal household becomes the living centre through which divine favour is displayed to Egypt. Her name, often translated along the lines of the beautiful one has come, has only added to the spell around her. But the danger with Nefertiti is that modern fascination can turn her into an object rather than a historical actor. The famous painted bust in Berlin, with its long neck, balanced crown, and unreadable calm, has encouraged generations to imagine they know her. Yet that image is a masterpiece of court art, not a confession. It tells us about style, royal presentation, and Amarna aesthetics. It does not tell us what she thought in the privacy of a palace room, how she felt about the reforms, or how much political initiative belonged to her personally. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate the exact boundaries of her authority. What survives in the record suggests, however, that her role was not minor. In some scenes, Nefertiti performs actions associated with royal power in a way that feels unusually forceful. She is shown smiting enemies in a pose traditionally linked with kingship, a visual language of domination and cosmic order. She appears at worship under the Aten, not simply watching Akhenaten but participating. Her figure can be monumental. Her name and image are tied to the central symbols of the new religion. This does not automatically mean she ruled as an equal in every administrative sense. But it does mean that Amarna's official art wanted viewers to see her as more than a passive consort. She is woven into the sacred performance of the state. The royal family scenes add another layer. Akhenaten, Nefertiti, and their daughters are shown in images of remarkable intimacy by Egyptian standards, the king and queen seated together, holding children, receiving the Aten's rays, inhabiting moments that seem almost domestic. These scenes have often been described as tender, and they can feel startling beside the more formal severity of earlier royal art. Yet they are not casual family snapshots. They are carefully constructed ideological images. The family is not shown simply because the artist caught a private moment. The family is shown because the royal household itself has become part of the religious message. The Aten gives life to Akhenaten and Nefertiti. Through them, order radiates outward. The children, when they appear in these scenes, should be understood within that protective and symbolic frame. They are royal daughters represented as part of the living household under the sun, not as figures placed in danger or conflict. Their presence helps soften the visual language of the reign, but it also intensifies its central claim. The king's family is not hidden away from sacred imagery. It becomes sacred imagery. In a religion that emphasizes the visible sun, the visible royal household becomes a theological instrument. This is one reason Amarna art can feel so personal and so controlled at the same time. Nefertiti's position within this system raises one of the great unresolved questions of the period. Was she a powerful queen who helped shape the Aten revolution, or was her prominence mainly a reflection of Akhenaten's religious symbolism? No single explanation fully accounts for all the evidence. Her images are too strong to dismiss, but the machinery of ancient Egyptian representation does not always reveal actual political decision-making. A figure can be ritually central without governing independently. A queen can hold enormous influence without leaving the kinds of documents modern historians wish she had left. Nefertiti stands precisely in this space between visibility and uncertainty. Her religious role may have been especially important because the Aten revolution narrows divine access through the royal family. If the king is the unique interpreter of Aten, then the queen beside him becomes part of that sacred channel. Nefertiti's body, crown, gestures, and name are drawn into the new theology. She helps make the king's vision emotionally persuasive. Akhenaten alone might appear severe, even isolating. Akhenaten with Nefertiti and their daughters creates a different image, a world ordered by sunlight, fertility, affection, and royal life. The art turns doctrine into a family tableau. It makes a radical religious program look natural, intimate, almost inevitable. But beneath the sunlight lies pressure. Nefertiti's prominence also means that when the revolution fails, her memory becomes vulnerable. Later destruction does not fall only on Akhenaten. The images and names of the Amarna royal family are attacked as part of the same rejection. Faces are damaged, inscriptions are cut, buildings connected with Aten worship are dismantled. Nefertiti, who had been made so visible under the new sun, becomes part of what later Egypt tries to obscure. Her fame today partly comes from the strange survival of fragments after that attack. Like Akhenaten, she is both displayed and erased, present and missing. This tension is especially powerful because Nefertiti's end remains uncertain. At some point late in the reign, her visibility changes in ways that have produced intense debate. Did she die before Akhenaten? Did she take on a new royal identity? Did she serve briefly as a co-regent or even rule under another name? Was she connected to the shadowy figures who occupy the confusing years between Akhenaten and Tutankhamun? The evidence does not allow a simple answer, and confident claims often outrun what can be proven. The safest conclusion is also the most haunting one of the most visible women in ancient Egyptian art becomes difficult to follow precisely when the Amarna story enters its most unstable phase. The city preserves traces of her world, but not a clean biography. Its palaces and temples show the stage on which she appeared, Its reliefs show her beneath the Aten. Its damaged monuments show the hostility that followed. The later imagination has tried to fill the gaps with romance, conspiracy, and disappearance. But archaeology is slower and less obedient. It gives fragments, not certainty. A face from a sculptor's workshop, a name in an inscription, a body in ritual posture, a queen beside a king beneath a disk of light. These traces are enough to prove importance, not enough to finish the story. Nefertiti's power in the narrative of Akhenaten lies in that incompleteness. She makes the revolution more human, more visual, and more unsettling. Through her, the Aten religion is not only a doctrine imposed from above, it becomes a royal performance of family, beauty, gender, fertility, and divine intimacy. Through her damaged memory, the backlash after Amarna becomes more than a political correction. It becomes an attempt to unmake an entire sacred image. The queen who stood in the sunlight with Akhenaten becomes one of the clearest signs that this was not a small reform. It was a reimagining of how Egypt should see power itself. And so, as Akhenaten rises from the desert and the Aten's rays fall across its open courts, Nefertiti stands at the center of the brightness, luminous and unreachable. She is not the answer to the mystery, but she sharpens it. A pharaoh changes his name, builds a city, challenges the old gods, and places beside him a queen whose image seems to carry the revolution's beauty and danger at once. Later, Egypt will try to break that image, but the broken pieces remain bright enough to trouble history still. The art of Akhenaten does not feel like a quiet adjustment. It feels, even now, like someone has opened the windows of Egyptian royal imagery and let in a harsh new light. For centuries, Egyptian art had carried an extraordinary sense of balance. Bodies were idealized according to rules that made kings appear timeless, gods appear stable, and the world appear ordered. A pharaoh could be young or old in life, strong or weak in body, successful or troubled in politics, but on temple walls he usually stood in the grammar of eternity: firm shoulders, controlled posture, forward stride, clear profile, ritual calm. The image did not exist to capture a passing moment. It existed to preserve a truth about kingship. Then, under Akhenaten, that grammar bends. The king's body becomes strange. His face lengthens, his jaw and chin narrow, his lips appear full, his chest can seem slight, his belly rounded, his hips broad, his limbs slender. Nefertiti and the royal daughters share elements of this same visual language, creating a family style that looks almost deliberately different from what came before. The effect is unsettling because it is not simply ugly, beautiful, realistic, or symbolic in any easy way. It resists a single explanation. Some viewers have seen illness in it. Others have seen theology, artistic experimentation, or a new way of showing the royal body as touched by the creative force of the Aten. Scholars still debate how much of Amarna art reflects physical appearance and how much reflects ideology. But the safest reading is that it cannot be treated as a medical photograph carved in stone. That warning matters. Akhenaten's images have inspired many confident claims about deformity, genetic disease, endocrine disorders, and family abnormality. Most of those claims go beyond what the evidence can prove. Egyptian royal art is never neutral documentation. It is a controlled language. Even when it becomes more relaxed or intimate, it remains purposeful. The unusual body of Akhenaten may be meant to signal something about fertility, divine transformation, or the king's unique relationship with the Aten. The rounded belly and softened form may connect him visually with creation and life-giving abundance, or they may belong to an artistic system whose full meaning is now partly lost. No single explanation fully accounts for every image, and the evidence remains incomplete. What is certain is that Amarna art breaks the older rhythm. It introduces motion, tenderness, exaggeration, and immediacy in ways that still feel startling. The royal family sits beneath the Aten as rays descend in lines ending in small hands. Akhenaten lifts one of his daughters. Nefertiti holds a child on her lap. The king and queen lean toward one another. Bodies overlap more naturally. Heads tilt. Bellies curve. Hands reach. The scenes seem private, almost domestic. Yet they appear in official royal contexts. This is one of Amarna's most powerful contradictions. Art looks more human while serving a more concentrated ideology of divine kingship. The family appears closer, but access to the god becomes narrower. The sun itself becomes a design principle. In older divine scenes, gods often stand before the king in human or animal form, receiving offerings or granting life. In Amarna imagery, the Aten is above, a disk with rays stretching downward like visible lines of power. The rays guide the viewer's eye. They connect heaven to king, king to queen, queen to children, ritual to body. They make the invisible relationship between god and ruler physically visible. A person looking at these images does not need to enter a dark sanctuary to understand the religious claim. The claim is drawn openly, life comes from the Aten, and the royal family stands nearest to its source. Architecture and art work together here. Open-air temples expose worship to the sun, while reliefs and painted surfaces repeat the pattern of rays and offerings. The visual world of Akhenaten is built around brightness, exposure, and royal mediation. Even the materials used in construction may have helped the speed of the revolution. Many Aten buildings were made with small standardized stone blocks often called talatat, easier to move and assemble quickly than larger traditional blocks. This technical detail has a long afterlife. After the Amarna period, those same blocks could be dismantled and reused inside later buildings, hiding broken pieces of Akhenaten's world within monuments raised by the restored order. Erasure, by a quiet irony, helped preserve fragments. The art also reveals a city in which innovation required labor and organization. Someone had to quarry stone, cut blocks, prepare plaster, mix pigments, train hands, repeat royal forms, and translate a new theology into thousands of images. The change was not merely an artist's whim, it was a state program. Workshops had to adapt. Sculptors had to learn new proportions. Relief carvers had to repeat the Aten's rays with disciplined regularity. Painters had to create royal bodies that looked unlike the bodies of earlier kings while still carrying sacred authority. The Amarna style may feel free, but it was not uncontrolled. Its very strangeness required rules. One of the lesser-known wonders of Amarna is how close it can bring us to artistic process. Finds from sculptors' workshops, including unfinished heads, trial pieces, and models, suggest a world where royal images were studied, adjusted, copied, and refined. The famous bust of Nefertiti belongs to this atmosphere of elite artistic production, even though it cannot answer every question modern viewers bring to it. Such objects remind us that Amarna's visual revolution was not only carved on temple walls, it lived in workshops, in practice pieces, in the hands of artists navigating the demands of a court that wanted to be seen differently. But differently does not necessarily mean freely. Amarna art is often described as naturalistic, and compared with older royal formality, it can indeed feel alive. Animals, plants, and family gestures sometimes appear with remarkable sensitivity. Yet the term can mislead. The art is not simply a sudden discovery of realism. It is selective. It makes some things more immediate while making others more symbolic. The royal family is intimate, but also elevated beyond ordinary reach. The Aten's rays are visible, but the god itself remains abstract. The king's body is more vulnerable in appearance, yet his religious authority becomes more absolute. The style humanizes and intensifies power at the same time. This visual shift would have made the Amarna period difficult to absorb after its fall. Later Egyptians did not inherit only a theological problem. They inherited images that looked wrong according to restored standards. Akhenaten's monuments did not merely say dangerous things. They looked like a dangerous memory. Their bodies, sun discs, names, and offering scenes belonged to a world that the post-Amarna kings wanted to treat as an error. To dismantle those monuments was therefore to remove a visual language as much as a religious system. It was to break the grammar of a reign. And yet the broken grammar survives. A carved ray, a damaged royal hand, a reused block, an unfinished head, a fragment of a family scene beneath the Aten each preserves a piece of the experiment. The art that later Egypt tried to suppress has become one of the reasons Akhenaten cannot disappear. It is too distinctive to dissolve into the background of ancient history. Even damaged, it announces itself. It tells us that something profound happened at Akhenaten, something that reached beyond prayer into the way bodies, family, light, and authority were imagined. The strange art of Amarna is therefore not an ornament to the story. It is one of the story's deepest clues. Akhenaten's revolution did not remain in royal decrees or temple theology. It entered faces, it changed postures, it softened and distorted the royal body. It placed a queen and children beneath divine rays. It made the sun's touch visible in stone. And when the old order returned, these images were not harmless relics. They were evidence of a world that had briefly learned to see differently, and for that reason, they had to be broken. Behind the polished image of Akhenaten, behind the royal family receiving life from the Aten, behind the open temples and the new art, there is another city made of mud, smoke, bone, sweat, and repetition. It is easy to let Akhenaten's vision dominate the whole landscape, because kings are very good at making their dreams larger than the people who build them. But Amarna resists that illusion. Its ruins do not preserve only theology. They preserve neighborhoods. They preserve floors worn by movement, ovens blackened by use, storage jars, animal remains, chipped stone, broken tools, beads, moulds, charcoal, and the faint architecture of daily survival. If the central city speaks in the voice of royal ideology, the houses and workshops speak in quieter tones, and their message is more complicated. Akhenaten is not simply a temple complex with people living around it. It is a working capital. Officials need homes. Scribes need rooms where documents can be stored and copied. Craftsmen need workshops. Labourers need places to sleep, eat, repair tools, and recover from the day. Animals have to be slaughtered. Grain has to be processed. Bread has to be baked. Beer has to be brewed. Water has to be carried. And the city has to be supplied continually from fields and river routes beyond the sacred desert bay. The Aten may stand above everything, but no city lives on light alone. Beneath the god of the sun is an economy of grain dust, clay, rope, baskets, fuel, and tired hands. The mud brick houses of Amarna are among its most revealing remains. Some are large, built for officials and elite families, with reception areas, private rooms, storage spaces, and sometimes garden courts or facilities that suggest comfort and status. Others are more modest, arranged around practical needs rather than display. Their differences matter. The city of a religious revolution is still a city of hierarchy. People do not experience Akhenaten's new world equally. Some live close to privilege, ceremony, and administrative power. Others live nearer to the demands of labor, production, and service. What survives in the record suggests an urban society shaped by rank, skill, dependency, and access, even if the evidence remains incomplete. At the edges and in the suburbs, the story becomes even more physical. Archaeological work at workshop areas shows that Amarna was a place of making. Glass, faience, stone, metalwork, and other crafts were produced in an urban system that required fuel, raw materials, trained hands, and supervision. These were not minor decorative activities. The new capital needed objects constantly inlays, vessels, ornaments, tools, ritual equipment, architectural fittings, and materials for elite display. A pharaoh can announce a new age, but craftsmen have to make it visible. They turn ideology into surfaces that shine, objects that can be carried, and details that make palaces and temples feel worthy of divine light. Faience is especially fitting for this world. With its bright blue-green surfaces, it can evoke water, rebirth, brilliance, and preciousness, even when made from common materials transformed by skill and heat. In a city devoted to a solar god, such crafted brightness has its own quiet poetry. Yet the workshop evidence also pulls us away from poetry into labour. Furnaces require fuel, materials fail, pieces break, waste accumulates, production leaves behind debris that royal scenes never show. The finished object may enter a palace or temple, but the archaeology of its making remains among ash, slag, fragments, and discarded matter. That contrast is one of Amarna's most useful truths. Beauty and pressure are often found in the same layer. The cemeteries deepen the picture further. Unlike royal tombs designed for grandeur, the non-elite burial grounds at Amarna offer a direct and sometimes sobering view of the population that lived under Akhenaten's experiment. Studies of human remains have suggested heavy workloads, nutritional stress, and the physical marks of demanding lives. This does not mean every inhabitant was constantly suffering, and it does not allow simple drama about a doomed city collapsing under misery alone. But it does remind us that royal reform had a human cost. A new capital built quickly in the desert requires concentrated effort, and bodies remember effort even when official inscriptions do not. Scholars still debate how representative the excavated cemeteries are of the whole population, and no single explanation fully accounts for the patterns seen in the remains. Burial grounds can reflect particular communities, social levels, or moments in the city's short life. Still, the evidence is difficult to ignore. Amarna's ordinary dead reveal a population living in a fast-built, highly organized, and possibly stressful urban environment. The City of the Sun was not only a place of ritual clarity, it was also a place where people carried loads, ground grain, made bricks, tended animals, worked in heat, and adapted to a royal project that may have offered little room for refusal. Food remains add another human layer. Animal bones found near domestic and temple contexts show patterns of consumption, provisioning, and offering. Elite households may have had better access to meat and higher quality goods, while ordinary families depended more heavily on staples, bread and beer, The foundations of Egyptian diet would have been everywhere in production, payment, ritual, and daily meals. The smell of baking bread may have been as common in Akhenaten as the sight of the Aten's rays on temple walls. Such details are easy to overlook, but they are what make the city real. A religious revolution still wakes up hungry. There is also the question of how much Akhenaten's theology entered ordinary homes. Official monuments proclaim devotion to the Aten, but household religion is harder to measure. People may have kept older habits quietly: protective objects, domestic rituals, personal prayers, and inherited beliefs do not vanish simply because a king changes the language of state worship. The evidence remains uneven, and scholars still debate the depth of Atenism beyond the court and official circles. It is possible that many residents participated outwardly in the new order while carrying older fears and hopes in private. Ancient people could be practical about power. They could serve the king's god in public and still worry about childbirth, illness, luck, ancestors, and the dead in older ways. This gap between official vision and lived experience is one of the most important tensions in Amarna. The central ideology tries to simplify the sacred world around the Aten and the royal family. Daily life resists simplification. A mother preparing food, a craftsman repairing a tool, a scribe checking deliveries, a guard waiting in heat, a worker returning with sore shoulders, an official hosting visitors in a painted room all inhabit Akhenaten's city. But not all inhabit it in the same way. The king's reform gives the city its reason for existing. Ordinary routines give it texture. Even the architecture of houses reflects both social order and adaptation. Elite residences could include spaces for receiving dependents and visitors, making the house a miniature centre of authority. Smaller homes show tighter arrangements, more direct relationships between work and domestic life, and less separation between public and private functions. In a quickly created city, these patterns may reveal both planning and improvisation. Akhenaten is not a utopia designed perfectly from above. It is a place where people settle into the spaces available to them, adjust, repair, expand, and leave traces of small decisions not recorded in royal texts. The surprising thing is that these ordinary traces may tell us more about the reality of Akhenaten's reign than the grandest images do. Royal art tells us how the king wants the world to appear. Houses and bones tell us what the world costs. Workshops reveal the labour behind sacred beauty. Cemeteries reveal the bodies beneath official time. Food remains reveal supply, status, and habit. Mud brick walls reveal neighbourhoods that the later campaign of erasure did not entirely destroy because they were too humble to matter politically. The very parts of the city least likely to be glorified become some of the most honest witnesses. So the bright city becomes darker, but not in a melodramatic way. It becomes deeper. Akhenaten is not only a stage for Akhenaten and Nefertiti beneath the sun, it is a crowded, unequal, productive, fragile place where a royal revolution has to be lived by people who did not invent it. Their names are mostly lost. Their voices do not come down to us in grand hymns. But the marks of their lives remain in brick, ash, bone, potsherds, workshop waste, and burial grounds used for only a brief span before history changes direction. If Akhenaten wanted a city that would make one god visible, archaeology has made something else visible too, the thousands of human lives caught inside the glow of his idea. The shining city has a soundscape that royal art does not preserve. Temple reliefs show rays of light, offering tables, royal hands lifted toward the Aten, but they do not tell us what Akhenaten sounds like at the edge of the desert. where work communities live close to guarded routes and royal tombs. They do not preserve the scrape of sandals on hard ground, the low murmur of workers before sunrise, the dull rhythm of tools, the bark of orders, the movement of animals, the creak of baskets, or the sudden sharp note of a whistle cutting through the air. Yet one small object from the outskirts of Amarna brings that missing world closer, a worked bone whistle from the stone village, a modest artifact that suggests sound, signal, supervision, and the organized pressure behind Akhenaten's sacred project. The stone village lies away from the central display of Akhenaten in a more isolated zone connected with the desert landscape beyond the main city. It is not a palace. It is not a royal temple. Its importance comes from its position and function. Archaeologists have understood it as part of a network of work-related settlements in the desert hinterland, possibly connected to labour, guarding, provisioning, and the protection or servicing of areas linked to the royal tombs. The exact nature of the community remains debated, and the evidence does not allow a single simple label. Still, what survives in the record suggests that this was not ordinary urban housing placed casually at the edge of town. It was part of a controlled landscape. That word, controlled, matters. Akhenaten was a city of revelation in its official language, open to the sun, built beneath the visible disk, but it was also a city of boundaries. The king marked the sacred territory with stele. The desert routes mattered. The royal tomb area mattered. Workmen's settlements mattered. Movement between city, cliffs, quarries, cemeteries, and ritual spaces had to be organized. A capital built around a new religious order could not rely only on inspiration. It required administration, surveillance, access rules, supply systems, and people whose duty was to keep certain spaces functioning and protected. The Aten's light may have been universal, but Akhenaten's city was not free of gates. A bone whistle is a small thing, almost easy to overlook beside temples and royal inscriptions. That is why it is so valuable. It belongs to a different scale of history. It does not proclaim theology. It does not flatter the king. It does not ask to be remembered forever. It is practical, portable, and immediate. A whistle can summon, warn, coordinate, signal a change in work, mark a boundary, or draw attention across distance. Its exact use at Amarna cannot be proven beyond doubt, and scholars still debate how to interpret it. But its very existence opens a narrow window into the lived mechanics of control. Somewhere in the desert edge of Akhenaten, sound may have served authority. The image is quietly powerful, not the grand hymn to Aten, not the royal family glowing beneath divine rays, but a sharp note passing across stone and dust. It may have called workers together. It may have helped guards communicate. It may have regulated movement near sensitive zones. The evidence remains incomplete, and caution is necessary. But the object reminds us that ancient power is not only monumental. Power is also timing. Power is who may pass, who must wait, who receives instructions, who watches, and who is watched. In a royal city created almost overnight, such mechanisms would have been essential. The stone village also complicates the gentle image sometimes attached to Amarna, because the art of Akhenaten's reign can appear intimate, because the Aten's rays seem life-giving, because the royal family scenes look tender. It is tempting to imagine the city as almost serene. But the archaeological landscape suggests a harder truth. Amarna was not merely a dream of sunlight. It was a state project carried out under pressure. People were moved, assigned, supplied, supervised, and buried. Work communities at the edge of the city remind us that the new capital required disciplined labor, and disciplined labor requires structures of command. The whistle is not proof of brutality. It is not evidence for a dark fantasy of tyranny by itself, but it does belong to a world where order had to be maintained. The royal tombs in the eastern cliffs add another layer. Akhenaten did not only build a living capital, he prepared a sacred landscape for death, afterlife, and royal eternity. The route toward those tombs would have carried symbolic weight and practical importance. Tomb construction, supply, guarding, and ritual preparation all required people working outside the comfortable center of the city. The settlements associated with this wider desert zone may represent communities whose lives were tied to the most sensitive parts of the king's project. They stood near the boundary between public city and royal sacred secrecy. In older Egyptian tradition, royal tomb work was already surrounded by organization and restricted access. At Amarna, that pattern continues within a new religious frame. This is one of the deeper ironies of Akhenaten's revolution. He rejects much of the old religious order, but he cannot escape the administrative habits of Egyptian kingship. He still needs officials, laborers, guards, craftsmen, scribes, and controlled spaces. He still needs tombs. He still needs supply chains. He still depends on the ability of the state to direct human effort toward royal eternity. The Aten religion may open the temple to the sky, but the machinery beneath it remains recognizably pharaonic. The sunlit revolution rests on the same ancient foundation of command. Work communities also remind us that Akhenaten's population was not simply inspired followers drawn by belief. Some people may have come because loyalty to the king required it, some because their offices moved, some because their labor was demanded or assigned, some because opportunities existed in a fast-growing capital, some because their families depended on wages, rations, or service networks. No single explanation fully accounts for why all residents were there. Ancient cities are rarely built by one kind of person for one kind of reason. Akhenaten likely gathered ambition, obligation, devotion, convenience, and necessity into the same streets. The sound of control does not have to be loud to be effective. It may be a whistle, a shouted instruction, the presence of a guard, a list checked by a scribe, a route that cannot be taken, a wall that marks separation, a settlement placed exactly where supervision is needed. These things do not always leave grand ruins, but they shape lives. In the central city, Akhenaten appears as the chosen one of Aten. In the outlying work zones, his power appears differently as organization, schedule, distance, and discipline. The same reign produces both the image of divine intimacy and the reality of managed labor. There is no need to turn this into a simple story of oppression against joy or darkness against light. Ancient societies were more complex than that, and the evidence deserves patience. The people connected with the stone village may have possessed skill, identity, community, pride, and routine. They may have eaten together, told stories, repaired tools, honored household powers, and found meaning within the roles assigned to them. The whistle may have been an ordinary instrument of coordination rather than a symbol of fear, but even ordinary coordination reveals something the royal art omits. Akhenaten's city had to be controlled because it was fragile, new, and ideologically charged. That fragility can be felt everywhere once noticed. A city made quickly must be constantly held together. A religious reform that weakens older institutions must create new loyalties. A royal tomb landscape must be protected. A population brought into a new capital must be fed and organized. A god represented as pure light still needs earthly systems to sustain his cult. In that sense, the bone whistle is almost a perfect artifact of Amarna. It is small, but it carries the contradiction of the entire city. Akhenaten dreams upward toward the sun, yet it survives day by day through signals passed between human beings on the ground. When later Egypt begins to erase Akhenaten's memory, the great symbols are attacked: first names, royal faces, Aten temples, official monuments. But objects like the whistle survive because they're too humble to be targeted, or too easily lost in debris to be noticed. They preserve not the ideology of erasure, but the texture of life before erasure. Through them, the city becomes audible again, not as a hymn, not as a royal proclamation, but as a brief, piercing sound across the desert edge, calling people to order in the Pharaoh's unfinished dream. Beyond the cliffs of Akhenaten, beyond the open courts of the Aten temples and the careful choreography of the royal family beneath the sun, the world does not become quiet. It becomes wider, more anxious, and much harder to control. Akhenaten's city may have been founded as a sacred horizon, but it was also the capital of an empire. And empires are never made only of prayer. They are made of roads, garrisons, messengers, tribute, marriages, rival kings, frightened vassals, delayed shipments, diplomatic insults, and letters sent across dangerous distances with the hope that someone powerful will answer. In the archive known as the Amarna tablets, that wider world presses into the Sun City on pieces of clay. The tablets are among the most remarkable survivals of Akhenaten's age. They are not carved in Egyptian hieroglyphs for temple walls, but written mostly in cuneiform, the diplomatic script of the late Bronze Age Near East. Their language is largely Akkadian, the international language of royal correspondence. This detail alone is revealing. Akhenaten was not a strange religious island cut off from the rest of the ancient world. It was connected to Babylon, Assyria, Mitanni, Hatti, Cyprus, and the city-states and vassal rulers of Canaan and the Levant. While Akhenaten looked toward the Aten above Egypt, messengers from foreign courts were still moving through the political weather of Western Asia, carrying gifts, demands, excuses, warnings, and carefully measured flattery. The Amarna letters change the texture of the reign because they bring in voices outside the king's visual program. Royal reliefs show Akhenaten in control, receiving divine life, appearing in ordered scenes where the Aten's rays descend with perfect regularity. The letters are different. They are full of need. Foreign rulers complain about gold, marriage negotiations, gifts that are not generous enough, envoys who are delayed, promises that are not kept. Vassal princes plead for help, accuse rivals, insist on loyalty, warn of danger, and sometimes sound desperate to be heard. Their world is not the serene world of sunlight and offerings. It is a political landscape of unstable alliances and local struggles. This does not mean Egypt's empire simply collapsed because Akhenaten was too distracted by religion. That familiar claim is tempting, but it is too simple. Scholars still debate how much Akhenaten personally neglected foreign affairs, how much the problems visible in the letters reflect long-standing imperial tensions, and how much later memory exaggerated the damage caused by his reign. The evidence remains incomplete, and the letters themselves are not neutral reports. They are arguments written by people who want something. A vassal asking for troops may emphasize danger because fear is a tool of persuasion. A foreign king asking for gold may frame the request as friendship. status, and insult all at once. The archive reveals anxiety, but anxiety is not the same as total failure. Still, the contrast is striking. At the center of Egypt, Akhenaten builds a city meant to focus reality on one god and one royal family. At the edges of empire, reality refuses to narrow. The rulers of the Near East are not characters in Akhenaten's theology. They are partners, rivals, dependents, and opportunists operating inside their own systems of power. They care about marriage alliances, military support, trade, prestige, and whether Egypt still behaves like the great power it has long claimed to be. The sun may shine over foreign lands in Akhenaten's religious imagination, but foreign kings still count gifts, weigh insults, and watch borders. A lesser-known power of the Amarna letters is that they make Akhenaten's reign feel almost modern in its bureaucracy. These are not mythic whispers, they are administrative objects. Clay tablets are written, dried, sent, received, stored, and eventually lost or buried. They belong to a world of scribes trained in international convention, of envoys travelling between courts, of archives maintained inside palatial systems. The survival of these tablets at Amarna reminds us that Akhenaten's radical religious experiment did not abolish the ordinary machinery of state. Diplomacy continued, complaints continued, paperwork, or rather claywork, continued. The world outside Egypt kept sending messages. The letters from vassals in the Levant are especially restless. Local rulers describe threats from neighbouring cities, groups, and shifting powers. They assure the Pharaoh of loyalty, sometimes in extravagant language, while accusing others of rebellion or betrayal. They ask for archers, they ask for recognition, they ask that Egypt notice them before their enemies do. Whether every claim is accurate is another matter. Ancient correspondence can be self-serving, and no single letter should be treated as a transparent window, but taken together, the archive suggests that Egypt's imperial system required constant attention. Authority at a distance had to be performed repeatedly, through messengers, gifts, military presence, and the careful management of local rivalries. This creates one of the quiet tensions in Akhenaten's story. A pharaoh who concentrates sacred truth around himself also inherits the burden of a vast diplomatic world. His court must respond to foreign kings who consider themselves his peers and to vassals who consider him their overlord. He cannot simply be the prophet of Aten, he must also be the manager of empire. If his religious reforms absorb too much energy, foreign affairs may suffer. If foreign affairs continue normally, then the image of an isolated fanatic becomes less convincing. The truth may lie somewhere between Akhenaten's reign continues to operate as an imperial court, but the ideological and administrative strain of his reforms may have changed priorities, personnel, and attention in ways that are difficult to measure. The great powers surrounding Egypt are not passive. Mitanni, once a major partner and rival, faces pressure. The Hittite kingdom grows increasingly important. Babylon and Assyria watch the diplomatic balance. Cyprus, known for copper, belongs to the exchange networks that feed Bronze Age power. This is the late 18th dynasty, but it is also the late Bronze Age world, a system of palaces and kings whose connections are both impressive and fragile. Long before the broader Bronze Age collapse that will come later, the Amarna archive shows a world already dependent on communication, prestige, and trust. It is not falling apart yet, but it is not simple. Inside this world, gold has a language of its own. Egypt's gold is famous, and foreign rulers want it not merely as wealth, but as a sign of relationship. Gifts between kings are never just gifts. They proclaim rank, affection, equality, superiority, and obligation. A shipment that seems too small can be read as an insult. A delayed marriage negotiation can become a diplomatic wound. The emotional tone of some letters may seem almost petty until one remembers that in royal diplomacy, objects carry messages: a gold statue, a chariot, a bride, a necklace, a carved vessel, each moves through a web of meaning. Akhenaten's court had to understand this language even while inventing a new sacred language at home. The Amarna tablets also complicate the idea of erasure. Later, Egypt tried to smooth over Akhenaten's memory, but these clay letters preserve the international reality of his reign, in a form less vulnerable to temple destruction. They do not praise him as the chosen one of Aten. They do not condemn him as a heretic. They simply show that during his time, the machinery of diplomacy was alive, noisy, and demanding. Their survival gives history a second archive, one not fully controlled by Egyptian royal self-presentation. Through them, Akhenaten becomes not only a religious revolutionary, but a ruler receiving pressure from a world beyond the Nile. The city of the Aten, then, is not as sealed as its ideology might suggest. Messages cross its boundaries. Foreign names enter its offices. Scribes trained in distant conventions sit within an Egyptian capital built for a new god. Clay from the world of cuneiform rests in the city of the sun disk. This mixture is one of Amarna's most revealing contradictions. Akhenaten wants a purified sacred centre, but his capital is full of foreign correspondence. He builds a horizon for Aten, yet the horizon keeps filling with other kings. And somewhere in that tension, the coming failure becomes easier to sense. Not because the letters prove that Akhenaten single-handedly ruined Egypt's empire, but because they show how many responsibilities pressed against his experiment. A king can rename himself. He can build a city. He can elevate one god and damage the names of others. But he cannot make the wider world stop moving. Beyond Amarna, rivals rise, vassals plead, scribes write, messengers travel, and the political life of the late Bronze Age continues with all its impatience. The Aten shines over everything, but light alone does not answer letters. The pressure inside Akhenaten is not always visible in the places where Akhenaten wants history to look. On temple walls, the Aten pours life downward in perfect rays. In royal scenes, the king and queen stand at the centre of a purified world. In the city's official imagination, light brings order, and order gathers around the throne. But archaeology has a way of lowering its gaze. It looks not only at sacred images, but at bones, rubbish, unfinished objects, abandoned rooms, and the marks left when human bodies are asked to carry the weight of an idea. From that lower angle, the Amarna revolution appears less like a clean spiritual awakening and more like a costly experiment forced into existence at speed. A new capital is never just a place. It is a demand. To build Akhenaten, people must be moved, assigned, fed, housed, and organized. Bricks must be made in enormous numbers, stone must be cut, plaster must be spread, paint must be prepared, offerings must be supplied, roads must be maintained, workshops must produce the objects required by a court that is inventing a new visual language almost as quickly as it can commission it. Officials must follow the king. Servants, craftsmen, labourers, guards, scribes, and dependents follow with them. The city may be dedicated to sunlight, but its foundations are laid in work. The ordinary cemeteries of Amarna reveal some of the human strain behind that work. Studies of non-elite burials have shown signs consistent with hard labor and nutritional stress in parts of the population. This does not mean the entire city was a camp of misery, and it does not allow the story to be flattened into a simple accusation. Ancient urban life could be demanding everywhere, and the evidence remains incomplete. But the pattern at Amarna is difficult to separate from the city's speed, purpose, and short life. Akhenaten is not an old settlement slowly adjusting across generations. It is a royal project imposed on the landscape, and human bodies appear to have paid part of the price. The short use life of the city's cemeteries is one of the details that makes Amarna so valuable and so haunting. Many ancient burial grounds accumulate people over long centuries, blending different phases into a complicated mass of time. Amarna's cemeteries belong to a narrow window, roughly the brief span in which Akhenaten lives as the capital. That compressed timescale gives researchers a rare view of a population tied to a specific historical experiment. The dead are not just Egyptians of some broad era. They are people who lived under Akhenaten's city, in the shadow of his reforms, during the years when the Aten revolution was not yet a memory but a daily reality. For a long time, one tempting explanation hovered over Amarna's end plague. The idea is dramatic. A strange king builds a strange city, turns against the old gods, and then a mysterious disease sweeps through the capital, as if the world itself rejects him. It is a story that almost writes itself, which is exactly why it must be handled carefully. Recent reassessments of the archaeological and bioarchaeological evidence caution against presenting Akhenaten as a city destroyed by a devastating epidemic. The evidence for hardship is real, but hardship is not the same as plague. The evidence for a short-lived city is real, but abandonment is not the same as sudden mass death. No single explanation fully accounts for Amarna's end, and the plague narrative, attractive as it is, currently rests on weaker ground than the political and religious explanation. That distinction matters because mystery history can easily become irresponsible when it mistakes a powerful image for proof. Akhenaten does not need a hidden catastrophe to be tragic. Its tragedy is already present in the collision between royal certainty and human complexity. The city may have struggled because it was built too quickly, because its population was under pressure, because its religious system depended too heavily on one ruler, because old institutions had been disrupted, and because the wider empire still required attention. It may also have contained ordinary illness, as every ancient city did. But a grand epidemic is not required to explain why the city failed once the political will behind it weakened. The cost of Akhenaten's revolution is also institutional. By elevating the Aten and attacking the names or images of certain older gods, especially Amun, the king does not merely change rituals, he threatens established networks of wealth and authority. Temples are economic organisms. They own land, employ personnel, store goods, sponsor craftsmen, support festivals, and bind communities to the sacred order. To reduce their importance is to unsettle livelihoods and status. Even if Akhenaten's reforms did not penetrate every village or household equally, their impact at the level of state religion and elite administration must have been profound. People whose careers depended on older cults had reason to watch the new order with unease. There is a subtler cost as well, the cost of narrowing memory. Egyptian religion is normally expansive, able to absorb, combine, and layer divine beings across time. Akhenaten's mature program moves against that habit. It concentrates sacred meaning around Aten and around the royal family's privileged access to Aten. That concentration may have made the system appear clear and pure to its creator, but it also made it brittle. A broad religious world can survive the death of one king because it is distributed across temples, myths, festivals, regions, and households. Akhenaten's system, at least in its official form, depends intensely on Akhenaten. When the king is the unique interpreter of divine truth, the death of the king becomes more than a succession problem. It becomes a theological crisis. The art of the period shows this brittleness in beautiful form. The royal family beneath the Aten looks intimate and alive, but it is also the central pillar of the new sacred order. If that family's authority is questioned, the images lose their stability. If the old gods return, the Aten scenes become evidence of disruption. If later kings want to restore continuity, the Amarna style becomes a problem that cannot simply be ignored. The same images that once made Akhenaten's revolution persuasive later make it easier to identify an attack. The international letters add another layer of strain. While Akhenaten's court is absorbed in religious and urban transformation, vassals and foreign kings still expect Egypt to act with consistency. Whether or not the pharaoh neglected foreign affairs as badly as later imagination suggests, the Amarna archive reveals a world that demands attention. A ruler who reorganizes heaven still has to manage earth. He must answer complaints, maintain prestige, send gifts, receive envoys, and keep the machinery of empire from loosening. The cost of revolution is partly that every hour spent remaking the center is an hour in which the edges continue shifting. Yet the most human cost remains the least named. The people who made Akhenaten possible did not leave long explanations of what they believed. They left bodies, houses, tools, workshop debris, and burial grounds. Some may have found opportunity in the new capital. Some may have felt devotion to the Aten or loyalty to the king. Some may have followed because power leaves little room for refusal. What survives in the record suggests a mixed city, not a single emotional state. It is dangerous to imagine all its residents as victims, just as it is dangerous to imagine them all as willing believers. They lived inside history before it became a mystery. So the cost of the revolution is not one thing. It is not only famine, not only labor, not only politics, not only theology, not only foreign anxiety, and not a proven plague. It is the accumulation of pressures created when one ruler tries to redirect an old civilization toward a new sacred center. Akhenaten's vision is grand, but grandeur does not make a system durable. The Aten shines every morning with perfect reliability. Human institutions do not. They require compromise, inheritance, habit, loyalty, and time. Akhenaten has light. What it may not have had was enough time for that light to become tradition. When Akhenaten dies, the city does not immediately explain itself. That is one of the most frustrating and powerful features of the Amarna story. A ruler who filled stone with sunlight, names, royal images, and theological certainty leaves behind an ending that is blurred. The records grow difficult, names shift, successions become uncertain. Some monuments are damaged, some reused, some abandoned, and some belong to figures whose identities remain debated. The pharaoh who tried to make his reign appear as the clear horizon of a new age passes into one of the most confusing passages of Egyptian royal history. The sun still rises over the cliffs of Akhenaten, but the system built around Akhenaten begins to lose the force that held it together. His death probably comes after roughly 17 years on the throne, though the final details remain incomplete. We do not have the kind of clean palace account that would satisfy modern curiosity. There is no simple diary of his last days, no official confession of failure, no clear announcement that the Aten revolution has ended. Instead, there are fragments, inscriptions, altered names, disputed reigns, funerary traces, later restorations, and the strange silence produced when later kings decide that remembering too clearly is dangerous. Scholars still debate the exact sequence after Akhenaten, especially the roles of shadowy figures such as Smenkhkare and Nefertiti. The uncertainty is not a weakness in the story. It is part of the story. The Amarna revolution does not end with a neat closing scene. It unravels. The city he founded had been built around the presence of the Aten in light, the presence of the royal family in ritual, the presence of the king as the one who understands and serves the god most directly. This makes Akhenaten's death unusually destabilizing. Every pharaoh's death matters in Egypt, because kingship must pass safely from one body to another so order can continue. But Akhenaten has placed extraordinary emphasis on his own role as mediator of Aten's truth. If that role is not easily transferable, then his death is not merely political. It threatens the religious logic of the capital itself. Akhenaten depends on a living center, and that center has disappeared. There may have been attempts to continue the system, at least for a time. The evidence suggests that the Amarna world does not collapse in a single instant. Royal names associated with the late Amarna period appear, though their order and identity remain debated. Nefertiti's possible later role has generated intense scholarly discussion, especially because names and titles in this period can be difficult to interpret. Some researchers have proposed that she may have taken on a co-regent or ruling identity. Others are more cautious. What survives in the record suggests instability, experimentation, and perhaps short-lived efforts to preserve continuity. But no single explanation fully accounts for the confusing traces. The end of Amarna is not a clean replacement of one king by another. It is a fog of transition. Akhenaten itself likely remains inhabited for some time after Akhenaten's death. This matters because popular imagination often prefers the image of a city abandoned overnight, doors left open, fires dying in hearths, the inhabitants fleeing as if from a curse. The evidence points to something less theatrical and more historically plausible. The abandonment appears to have been gradual and organized in at least some areas. People do not necessarily vanish in panic. Officials, workers, and families may have left as the court shifted away, as administrative functions moved, as resources dried up, and as the new political direction became clear. Some people may have stayed longer, tied to property, labor, burial, or the simple difficulty of moving a life. The city empties because its reason for existing weakens. Akhenaten is not positioned like an old commercial city that can easily reinvent itself after the court leaves. It is a royal foundation, tied to a particular theology and a particular king. Its temples, palaces, roads, and elite houses are built to serve Akhenaten's sacred program. Once the state turns away from that program, the city loses its central function. Houses can still shelter people, workshops can still produce, fields along the Nile can still feed a population, but the great concentration of authority, wealth, and ritual attention begins to drain elsewhere. A capital without a court becomes an echo of itself. The process must have been strange for those who lived through it. Imagine a city built with urgency, filled with officials and craftsmen, watched by guards, supplied by river traffic, decorated with a new art, and told that it stands at the chosen horizon of the Aten. Then imagine the mood changing. Orders arrive from elsewhere. Names once honoured become uncomfortable. Priests of older gods begin to return to influence. The old sacred language, never fully dead in private life, becomes safer again. The people who had learned the habits of Akhenaten now have to learn the habits of restoration. For some, the change may bring relief. For others, uncertainty. For a few, perhaps danger. The record does not preserve their thoughts, but the city's abandonment preserves the outline of their displacement. The royal tombs add a further layer of unease. Akhenaten prepared his burial in the cliffs near his city, as if his afterlife too belonged to the Aten's horizon. Yet later events disturb that intention. Royal bodies, coffins, names, and funerary objects from the Amarna family become part of a complicated and still debated aftermath. The dead of this dynasty do not rest in a simple line of visible continuity. Some were moved, some identities remain uncertain, some traces were altered. This is fitting in a grim way, for a reign that made memory a battlefield. Akhenaten tried to redirect eternity, but after his death, even the arrangements of death become unstable. It is tempting to see his end as immediate judgment, the old gods returning, the city failing, the name condemned. But history is more patient and less moralistic than that. Akhenaten's revolution fails not because a single divine punishment can be demonstrated, but because the system he built is too dependent on royal will and too disruptive to entrenched structures. It lacks the long institutional roots that support older cults. It asks too much change too quickly. It places sacred access too narrowly. It builds a capital whose symbolic strength becomes practical weakness once the symbol loses authority. The Aten still shines, but the state no longer gathers around the same meaning of that light. As people leave, Akhenaten begins its transformation from capital into ruin. Mud brick walls crack, roofs fail, wind enters rooms that once held furniture, textiles, vessels, and voices. Valuable materials are removed. Stone blocks become tempting resources for later builders. Temple spaces lose ritual use. Streets become lines in dust. The city does not need an invading army to die. It needs only neglect, reuse, weather, and the withdrawal of purpose. A royal dream can be dismantled by policy, but it can also be undone by absence. And yet, because Akhenaten is abandoned rather than continuously rebuilt for centuries, it preserves the shape of its own failure. Later cities often bury their old phases beneath new life. Amarna is different. Its brief existence leaves a relatively clear archaeological footprint, not untouched, not complete, but unusually readable. The same abandonment that marks the failure of Akhenaten's vision becomes the reason modern archaeology can study his city as a frozen experiment. In losing its future, Akhenaten preserves its moment. So the pharaoh dies, and the horizon remains. The cliffs still catch the first light, the river still moves below the desert edge, but the sacred center has broken. What had been proclaimed as a new eternal order becomes a temporary episode. The city begins to empty, not as a legend of sudden doom, but as a quieter and more devastating reversal, the slow departure of belief, administration, wealth, and power. Akhenaten built Akhenaten so that his name and his god would endure together beneath the sun. After his death, Egypt begins to decide that both must be separated from its future. The restoration does not arrive like a single door slamming shut. It gathers slowly, through names, decrees, temple work, political caution, and the careful return of older language. After Akhenaten's death, Egypt does not simply wake one morning and become what it had been before. Too much has been disturbed. The capital has moved. The old gods have been diminished in public worship. Amun's name has been attacked. A generation of officials has learned to speak in the phrases of the Aten. Artists have worked in a changed style. The royal family has been displayed as the centre of divine access. The machinery of state has bent itself around Akhenaten. To reverse all of that requires more than dislike. It requires policy, patience, and a new story about continuity. At the centre of that new story stands Tutankhamun, the young ruler whose own name reveals the turn in Egypt's direction. He is not born into an easy inheritance. He comes to the throne after the most disruptive reign of the 18th dynasty, surrounded by senior officials, priests, courtiers, and power brokers who understand that the country must be stabilized. His original name, Tutankhaten, belongs to the world of the Aten. The later form, Tutankhamun, returns Amun to the royal body of language. That change is not decorative, it is a signal. The hidden god of Thebes, pushed aside under Akhenaten, is being invited back into the centre of kingship. The restoration is framed as repair. Egypt's official language after Amarna presents the previous disruption as a time when temples had fallen into neglect. Gods had been ignored, and sacred order had suffered. This rhetoric should be read carefully, because restoration texts are never neutral. They are political documents designed to justify a new direction. They may exaggerate damage in order to make the return to tradition seem more necessary and more glorious. Still, exaggeration does not mean invention from nothing. Akhenaten's reforms had genuinely disturbed the temple system, and the restored court had strong reasons to emphasize healing. The old gods needed offerings, their temples needed income, their priesthoods needed recognition. Egypt's sacred world had to be made broad again. Amun's return is especially important because Thebes has seen more than a religious city. It was a symbolic heart of empire, victory, legitimacy, and divine kingship. By reconnecting the throne to Amun, the post-Amarna regime reconnects itself to a long chain of authority. The move is both theological and practical. Temples regain status, priests regain influence, festivals can resume their public power. The older patterns of worship, in which many gods participate in maintaining cosmic balance, become safe again. After the narrowed glare of Akhenaten's Aten, Egypt moves back toward plurality, toward the familiar crowded heavens where divine forces overlap rather than compete for absolute exclusion. But restoration is not the same as simple return. Once a rupture happens, the past cannot be restored exactly as it was. The court has to manage the memory of what came before. It cannot pretend that Akhenaten never existed immediately, because too many people still know the truth. Officials served him. Buildings stand. Names remain on objects. The city of Akhenaten still lies in the desert. Diplomatic habits, court careers, royal family ties, and funerary arrangements all carry traces of the Amarna period. The first stage of restoration may therefore be cautious. It corrects direction without yet turning all memory into open condemnation. I, who follows Tutankhamun, belongs to this transitional world as well. He had connections to the Amarna court and survives into the restoration, a reminder that history is rarely divided into pure camps. The people who help undo Akhenaten's revolution are not all outsiders untouched by it. Some were formed inside it. Some adapted when the wind changed. Ancient politics rewards survival, and survival often requires flexible memory. Ai's brief reign sits in that difficult space between Amarna inheritance and post-Amarna correction. His presence suggests that the restoration was not only a religious reaction, but also a negotiation among elites who had to protect their legitimacy while distancing themselves from danger. Then comes Horemheb, and with him the restoration hardens. Horemheb is not a direct royal son in the simple dynastic sense. He rises from military and administrative power, and his reign becomes crucial in reshaping the official memory of the period. Under him, the state pushes more decisively to close the Amarna wound. He presents himself as restorer of order, a king who repairs what has gone wrong, strengthens institutions, and reconnects Egypt to proper tradition. In this role, he becomes one of the key figures in the long process by which Akhenaten and the rulers associated with Amarna are made uncomfortable, then marginal, then nearly invisible in official history. The restoration also has a material side. Temples require rebuilding, rededication, and resupply. Names of Amun and other gods can be restored where they had been damaged. New inscriptions proclaim loyalty to traditional deities. Old religious economies revive. The state must reassign resources, confirm offices, and rebuild trust with institutions that Akhenaten had challenged. This is less dramatic than smashing a face from a wall, but it may be more important. Erasure begins not only with chisels, it begins when offerings are redirected, when temple doors reopen, when scribes write different names, when officials find it safer to speak of Amun than Aten, when the habits of daily administration return to the older sacred map. The surprising thing is that the restoration preserves traces of Akhenaten, even as it rejects him. To repair something, the state has to define what was broken. To proclaim a return, it has to acknowledge a departure. The official memory becomes selective, but not empty. The Amarna period turns into a negative shape inside later history, an absence formed by pressure. The more the restored order insists on continuity, the more one senses the interruption beneath it. A perfectly smooth tradition would not need so much repair. No single explanation fully accounts for how ordinary Egyptians experienced this return. Some may have welcomed the old gods openly, relieved to see familiar rituals restored. Some may never have abandoned them privately in the first place. Some who benefited from Akhenaten's city may have lost position or purpose as the court moved away. Craftsmen trained in the Amarna style had to adjust. Officials associated too closely with the Aten may have had to rename loyalties, shift language, or disappear from prominence. The restoration was not only a theological event, it rearranged careers, reputations, and the safe ways to remember. Tutankhamun's own afterlife in modern fame can obscure his historical role in this process. Today he is known largely because his tomb survived with extraordinary richness. But in the post-Amarna story his importance lies in the return his reign represents. Through him, or through the powerful advisors acting around him, Egypt begins to step away from Akhenaten's horizon. The capital shifts. The old cults regain standing. Amun returns to the king's name. The language of balance and repair replaces the language of radical sunlight. The Aten is not necessarily denied as a solar reality, but it loses the exclusive position Akhenaten had forced upon it. By the time Horemheb's vision of restoration takes hold, the Amarna experiment is being transformed from a recent political reality into an era to be contained. The old gods have returned, but return is not enough. The memory of the disruption must be managed so it cannot threaten the future. Egypt's solution is not merely to move on. It is to reorder the past itself. The line of kings must look stable again. The sacred chain must appear unbroken. The dangerous names must become less speakable. The restored order does not just rebuild temples, it prepares to edit history. And so the restoration begins as healing. But healing in ancient kingship can have sharp edges. The gods are fed again. Amun rises back into royal favour. The court leaves the sun city behind. The language of tradition returns to monuments and offices. Yet beneath the calm surface of repair, a harder decision is forming. Akhenaten will not be remembered as a legitimate reformer who tried and failed. He will be treated as a rupture, a contamination in the royal sequence, a name that later power would rather not preserve. Egypt has brought back its gods. Now it must decide what to do with the pharaoh who tried to eclipse them. The erasure begins with the simple truth that is not simple at all in ancient Egypt. A name is a form of life. It is not merely a sound used by the living. It belongs to the structure of a person's survival beyond death. To be named is to remain reachable. To have one's name spoken, carved, painted, copied, and remembered is to continue in the human and divine order. Tombs protect bodies, offerings nourish spirits, images hold presence, and names keep identity from dissolving into the anonymous dark. This is why the attack on Akhenaten's memory becomes more than political revenge. It becomes an assault on existence itself. The restored order could have ignored him, at least in theory. It could have allowed his monuments to stand as the remains of an embarrassing reign, while quietly moving the kingdom back toward Amun and the older gods. But Akhenaten had done too much to be safely ignored. He had changed his name, built a new capital, elevated the Aten above the traditional divine world, damaged the visibility of Amun in sacred spaces, and made his own family the central image of divine access. His reign was not an ordinary failure. It was a challenge to how Egypt understood continuity. For later rulers, especially those determined to present themselves as restorers of cosmic and political order, leaving Akhenaten fully visible meant leaving the wound open. So the chisels go to work. Names are cut away, faces are damaged, reliefs are broken, Aten temples dismantled, blocks are reused in later constructions, sometimes hidden inside the very monuments of the restored order. Royal lists can pass over the Amarna kings, smoothing the line of succession so that the official story appears cleaner than the lived reality. The memory of the 18th dynasty is edited so that the uncomfortable sequence from Akhenaten through his immediate successors becomes blurred, compressed, or omitted. Egypt does not merely forget, it curates forgetfulness. This is not the same as the Roman phrase often used today, damnatio memoriae. Though the comparison is useful if handled carefully, Egypt has its own logic of memory and erasure. To damage a name or image is not only to insult a dead ruler in public, it can also interfere with that person's ability to endure in the afterlife. A carved image is not just representation, it participates in presence. A royal cartouche is not just decoration, it protects and declares identity. When Akhenaten's names are attacked, the act carries a metaphysical weight. The state is not only saying that he should not be honoured, it is pushing him toward non-being. There is a grim symmetry in this. Akhenaten himself had attacked the names and images of older gods, especially Amun. He understood, or at least used, the power of removing sacred presence from stone. The restored order answers in kind. The king who had made Amun's name vulnerable finds his own name vulnerable. The ruler who tried to narrow Egypt's divine memory becomes the object of a campaign to narrow historical memory. The violence is mostly symbolic, but symbolic violence in Egypt is never merely symbolic. It touches the boundary between life, death, and cosmic order. The erasure, however, is not uniform. It does not happen everywhere at once, nor with perfect consistency. Some monuments are destroyed thoroughly. Others are reused for practical reasons as much as ideological ones. A block from an Aten temple is still a useful block. A later builder may care about its material before its message. In some cases, the desire to dismantle Akhenaten's buildings and the desire to harvest building stone work together. This practical side does not weaken the political meaning. It makes it more effective. The old city can be physically consumed by the restored landscape. The visible signs of the revolution disappear, and their stones are swallowed into a different story. The Amarna style itself becomes a target because it is unmistakable. Akhenaten's elongated body, Nefertiti's powerful presence, the royal daughters beneath the Aten's hands, the sun disk with its descending rays, these images cannot easily be mistaken for another period. They announce the reign even when inscriptions are damaged. To erase Akhenaten, later power has to attack not only words but a visual world. Faces are especially vulnerable. A face in Egyptian art can hold identity and presence. To strike it is to unmake the person in the image. A broken face is not just vandalism. It is a theological and political wound. Yet the erasure reveals the fear it tries to hide. If Akhenaten were truly insignificant, if his reign had been a harmless eccentricity, such effort would not be necessary. The campaign against him shows that his memory retained power. He had touched institutions too deeply. He had offended divine order too visibly. He had placed his city and his family into the center of a new sacred system. Later Egypt's response suggests that the Amarna period was not remembered as a small deviation, but as something dangerous enough to be controlled after death. The king lists are one of the coldest forms of that control. A damaged statue is dramatic, but an omitted name may be even more chilling. A royal list gives shape to official time. It tells later generations who belongs in the chain of legitimate kingship. To remove a ruler from that sequence is to deny him a secure place in history's architecture. It makes the past appear smoother than it was. In some later traditions, the succession can be arranged as though the disruption is shortened or bypassed, linking acceptable kings across the gap. The result is not ignorance, at least not at first. It is managed knowledge. Those who needed to know may have known, but the official surface of memory was polished until the scar was harder to see. Horemheb's role is crucial in this process. As a restorer, he has every reason to present the Amarna period as illegitimate disorder. By positioning himself as the one who repairs Egypt, he benefits from making the break look severe while making his own reign look necessary. The rulers after him, especially the Ramesside kings, inherit a version of history in which Akhenaten is not a respected ancestor, but a problem best left unnamed. Over time, political editing can become cultural forgetting. What begins as deliberate suppression becomes, for later generations, absence. The surprising detail is that erasure creates archives of its own. A chisel mark tells us where a name once was. A reused block preserves part of a destroyed temple. A hacked relief shows what someone considered threatening. An omission in a king list raises the question of who has been excluded. Archaeologists and historians read not only what ancient people wrote, but what they tried to remove. Damage becomes evidence. Silence becomes shaped. The attempt to destroy Akhenaten's memory leaves a pattern, and that pattern is one of the reasons modern scholars can reconstruct the campaign against him. Still, the evidence remains incomplete. scholars continue to debate the timing, intensity, and motivations of different phases of erasure. Some destruction may have begun soon after the restoration. Some may belong more fully to Horemheb's reign. Some may reflect later reuse rather than immediate ideological fury. No single explanation fully accounts for every damaged object, every missing name, every repurposed block. The safest approach is to see erasure as a process rather than a single event: political, religious, practical, and symbolic forces working together across time. For Akhenaten, that process nearly succeeds. His city is abandoned, his god loses official supremacy, his name becomes unsafe, his monuments are broken, his successors are absorbed into a troubled shadow. The royal story moves on without him, or tries to. But total erasure is almost impossible when a king has built an entire capital on open ground. The restored order can cut names from stone, but it cannot easily remove streets from the desert. It can break faces, but fragments still carry style. It can reuse temple blocks, but the carved rays of Aten survive inside later walls. It can omit a name from a list, but omission itself leaves a suspicious gap. The dangerous name is therefore wounded, not killed. Akhenaten is pushed out of official memory, but not out of history. His afterlife becomes the opposite of what he intended. He does not endure smoothly through temple cult, royal honor, and repeated offerings. He endures through damage, excavation, argument, and the stubborn survival of broken things. Egypt tried to make him a silence. Instead, it left behind a silence with edges sharp enough to be traced. The fragments under the sand are not grand in the way Akhenaten wanted grandeur to work. They do not stand in perfect rows beneath the Aten. They do not announce a new sacred order with polished confidence. Many of them are broken, reused, scattered, weathered, or buried in places that seem almost accidental. A carved block may preserve only a hand at the end of a sun ray. A piece of painted plaster may hold a colour that once belonged to a palace floor. A house wall may survive as a low ridge of mud brick, hardly higher than the desert around it. A cemetery may reveal not royal splendour, but the narrow lifespan of a city's ordinary dead. Yet these fragments are exactly where Akhenaten's memory begins to return, because the restored order attacked the great symbols, while the smaller evidence endured in cracks, foundations, rubbish, and reused stone. Modern Amarna is therefore not only a site of discovery, it is a site of reversal. The ancient campaign tried to push the Aten revolution out of official history, but archaeology works in the opposite direction. It does not need the permission of king lists. It does not depend on later approval. It reads damaged surfaces, abandoned streets, and human remains with a patience that ancient propaganda could not fully anticipate. Every season of survey, conservation, and excavation makes the erasure less complete. The work is not glamorous in the popular sense. It often involves mapping walls, recording brickwork, stabilizing fragile architecture, studying animal bones, cataloguing small finds, comparing fragments, and protecting remains from erosion, groundwater, and modern encroachment. But this slow labour is how a broken city speaks. The houses are among the most vulnerable witnesses. Amarna contains the remains of thousands of mud brick dwellings, from elite villas to more modest homes, and many are threatened precisely because mud brick does not behave like stone. It softens, crumbles, absorbs damage, and gradually returns to earth. In some places, the outlines of ancient rooms are still readable. In others, the city's plan is fading. This gives modern work a sense of urgency. Akhenaten's city was once abandoned because the political and religious project behind it failed. Now parts of it face a different kind of disappearance, not from royal hostility, but from time, environment, and human pressure. The pharaoh was erased once by ideology. His city can be erased again by neglect. The villa of the vizier Nakht offers a glimpse of the elite world that surrounded the king. A vizier is not a minor figure. He belongs close to the machinery of administration, law, and royal command. To study such a house is to step behind the formal image of Akhenaten and into the lived architecture of power. Rooms, courtyards, storage areas, and domestic spaces reveal how high officials inhabited the new capital, how authority was arranged inside households, and how the court's followers translated the king's experiment into daily residence. The evidence remains incomplete, because no house preserves a whole life, but even a damaged villa can show how rapidly Amarna gathered an administrative class around its sacred centre. The Great Aten Temple, by contrast, draws the story back to the public heart of the revolution. Fragments from that space are not merely architectural debris, they belong to the ritual engine of Akhenaten's city, where offerings were presented under the open sky and the sun's rays became theology made visible. Studying pieces from the temple can reveal patterns of decoration, construction, ritual emphasis, and later destruction. A broken relief from such a place may hold the outline of royal hands, offering tables, rays, names, or figures once arranged to proclaim the Aten supremacy. When those pieces are scattered, the message is fractured. When they are studied, the message begins to reassemble, not as royal certainty, but as historical evidence. The cemeteries bring a different truth. South tombs, cemetery, and other burial areas connected with Amarna have become central to understanding the people who lived beneath the official brightness. Their importance lies partly in their brevity. Used for a short span, they preserve a population tied closely to the life of Akhenaten. These are not the eternal kings of Egypt, but the inhabitants of a fast-built capital, workers, dependents, perhaps families connected with labour systems and urban service. Their remains show stress, effort, and the human consequences of a city created under royal urgency. Scholars still debate the full meaning of the patterns, but the cemeteries make one thing clear. Akhenaten's revolution was not only a matter of doctrine, it entered bodies. Workshop sites add still another layer. In the suburbs and production zones, evidence for glass, faience, stone, and metalworking reveals a city busy with craft. These places show how Amarna's visual world was manufactured. The bright surfaces, inlays, ornaments, vessels, ritual objects, and elite materials did not simply appear because a pharaoh desired them. They came from skilled labour, controlled heat, raw materials, failures, waste, and repetition. The remains of production make Akhenaten less like a dream and more like an economy. They remind us that every sacred image has a workshop behind it, and every royal aesthetic depends on hands that are rarely named. Reused blocks are perhaps the most poetic evidence of all. After the Amarna period, pieces of Akhenaten's buildings were dismantled and built into later monuments. The intention may have been practical, ideological, or both: remove the visible Aten temples, reclaim usable stone, and bury the memory inside a restored order. But hidden blocks have a habit of surviving. Once removed from view, they may escape weathering. Once built into later structures, they can preserve carved details that would otherwise have been destroyed. The old erasure accidentally becomes a storage system. Later archaeologists find fragments of Akhenaten's world inside the architecture of those who wanted to outlive him. This is why Amarna's evidence is so powerful despite being incomplete. It comes from many directions at once. Royal reliefs show the ideology, houses show settlement, workshops show labour, cemeteries show health and mortality, letters show diplomacy, boundary stelae show sacred geography, reused blocks show destruction and survival. No single category tells the whole story, and no single explanation fully accounts for the rise and fall of the city. But together, the fragments produce something stronger than legend. They produce a damaged but coherent human landscape. The modern work at Amarna also changes the emotional tone of the story. It would be easy to speak only of a pharaoh erased from memory, as if history were a dark chamber sealed until one dramatic discovery opened it. The real process is more patient and more moving. The city returns slowly. A wall is mapped, a burial is studied, a whistle is identified, a workshop is published, a relief fragment is compared with another, a threatened house is recorded before it fades. The recovery of Akhenaten is not a single revelation, but a long resistance to disappearance. And because the recovery is slow, it remains honest about uncertainty. Archaeologists do not find Akhenaten's mind in the sand. They do not uncover a complete explanation for his motives or a final verdict on his character. They find the material consequences of his choices. They find a city he ordered into being, people who lived inside it, systems that supported it, damage that followed it, and fragments that survived the attempt to make it vanish. That may be less satisfying than a simple secret, but it is far more durable. The sand does not give back a myth. It gives back evidence, and evidence is often stranger because it refuses to say only one thing. So the city that Egypt tried to forget becomes a place where forgetting can be studied. Its ruins show how memory is built, attacked, buried, reused, and recovered. Akhenaten's enemies broke his images, but the break marks their fear. They dismantled his temples, but the blocks preserved his style. They abandoned his capital, but abandonment froze its plan. They damaged his name, but damaged names can still be read around the edges, under the desert light. Amarna remains unfinished in the deepest sense, unfinished as a city, unfinished as a revolution, and unfinished as a question history is still learning how to ask. Akhenaten's revolution fails, but failure is not the same as disappearance. That is the strange final turn in his story. The king who tried to reorder Egypt around the Aten loses the future he imagined. His city is abandoned, his temples are dismantled, his successors turn back toward Amun, his name is attacked, omitted, buried, and made uncomfortable. For centuries, the official memory of Egypt moves around him like water around a stone it does not want to acknowledge. Yet the stone remains, damaged, displaced, and half hidden, but still there. The pharaoh whom Egypt tried to push into silence becomes one of the most discussed rulers of the ancient world, not because his enemies failed to strike him, but because they could not strike everything. His afterlife in history is therefore built from contradiction. Akhenaten is remembered because he was erased. The damage draws attention. The gaps invite questions. The broken reliefs, reused blocks, abandoned streets, altered names, and strange art all make him harder, not easier to ignore. A conventional king might have dissolved into the long line of royal builders and temple patrons. Akhenaten, by being treated as a danger, becomes distinct. The effort to remove him leaves the outline of a crime against memory, and modern archaeology follows that outline back to the source. Still, the Akhenaten who returns is not the whole man. He is not fully recoverable. No excavation can restore every lost conversation, every private motive, every political negotiation, every fear in the court, every prayer in an ordinary house, or every calculation made by officials who survived the shift from Aten to Amun. What survives in the record suggests a ruler of immense ambition, religious intensity, and political daring. But scholars still debate the balance between conviction and strategy. Was he a visionary, a fanatic, a reformer, a centralizer of power, a poet of sunlight, or a king whose experiment became too rigid for the civilization that produced him? No single explanation fully accounts for him. That is why he endures. The most grounded answer may be that Akhenaten was dangerous because he touched too many foundations at once. He did not merely favour a god. He changed his name, changed the royal image, changed the sacred geography of the court, changed temple architecture, challenged Amun, founded Akhenaten, elevated the royal family as the visible centre of divine access, and forced Egypt's old religious plurality into a narrow official focus. Any one of these choices would have mattered. Together, they formed a rupture. Later, Egypt did not erase him because he was a harmless dreamer. It erased him because his reign proved that even an ancient order could be interrupted from within. And yet the interruption also reveals the strength of that order. Egypt absorbs the shock. The old gods return. Amun rises again. The royal line is smoothed. Temples are restored. The state rebuilds continuity over the wound. The Amarna experiment, bright and severe, cannot hold the kingdom after Akhenaten's death. Its dependence on one king, one city, and one concentrated vision makes it vulnerable. The older religious world, with its many gods, many temples, many rituals, and deep local roots, proves more durable. It does not need one man to survive. Akhenaten's Aten does. This is perhaps the quietest lesson of the erased pharaoh. A revolution can be brilliant and brittle at the same time. It can produce extraordinary art, unforgettable images, new forms of worship, and a city unlike any other in Egypt, while also creating instability too deep to last. Akhenaten's reign is not a simple tale of enlightenment crushed by tradition, nor a simple tale of madness corrected by wisdom. It is a human and political event filled with beauty, pressure, sincerity, ambition, hardship, and consequence. The evidence refuses to flatten itself into a moral fable. The city of Amarna remains the clearest witness. It is not merely where Akhenaten lived. It is the physical form of his argument. Its open temples say that light has replaced sacred darkness. Its boundary stelae say that a new holy landscape has been chosen. Its palaces say that the royal family stands at the centre of the visible divine world. Its workshops say that theology requires skilled production. Its cemeteries say that bodies bore the burden of the project. Its abandoned houses say that a city can lose its purpose when the idea sustaining it collapses. Its modern excavations say that memory, once attacked, can still return through patient work. Nefertiti, too, remains within that returning memory. Her image carries the beauty and danger of the Amarna vision. She stands beside Akhenaten not as a minor ornament, but as part of the royal theology that made the Aten visible through family, ritual, and power. Her uncertain end mirrors the uncertainty of the whole period. She is famous, yet elusive, present in art, yet difficult to follow in history, luminous, yet damaged by the same backlash that struck the king. Through her, the story becomes not only a religious revolution, but a transformation of royal visibility itself. The later erasure cannot undo that transformation completely. Even when the faces are struck, the style remains recognizable. Even when names are cut away, the empty spaces speak. Even when blocks are reused, the Aten's rays survive in fragments. Even when king lists omit, omission leaves a suspicious silence. Akhenaten's enemies understood the power of memory, but they also underestimated the memory of damage. A broken thing can sometimes travel farther through time than an untouched one, because breakage asks to be explained. That is why the erased name still feels dangerous, though not in the supernatural sense. It is dangerous because it reminds us that history is not only what civilizations choose to preserve, it is also what they try to hide, correct, bury, rename, and deny. Akhenaten's story exposes the politics of memory with unusual clarity. A civilization that carved eternity into stone also carved absence into stone. It made remembering sacred, then used that same sacred logic to make forgetting an act of power. But forgetting did not win, not completely. The Sun City lies in ruins, yet it has become readable again. The Pharaoh's name was wounded, yet it is spoken again. The old order returned, yet the interruption remains visible. Akhenaten did not create the eternal future he imagined, but he created a question that survived every attempt to close it. And in the long record of ancient Egypt, that may be his most unsettling monument, not a pyramid, not a perfect temple, not an unbroken royal cult, but a scar in memory that never fully healed. When the story of Akhenaten begins to fade from the sharpness of names and reigns, what remains is a quieter image, a city at the edge of the desert, open to the morning sun. The walls are low now, the roofs are gone, the voices have disappeared. The great argument that once filled the place has softened into wind, dust, and light. Yet the ground still remembers shape. Streets still run where people walked. Houses still hold the outline of rooms. Broken stones still carry the faint touch of hands, rays, offerings, and erased faces. Time does not preserve human stories gently. It wears them down, mixes them with silence, and leaves later generations to decide whether a fragment is enough to begin again. Akhenaten wanted a new eternity. His successors wanted his memory to end. Neither side fully received what it wanted. The Aten did not remain supreme, but Akhenaten did not vanish. Amun returned, but the wound of Amarna stayed beneath the surface. The old order rebuilt itself, but the strange sunlit city waited in the desert, patient in the way only ruins can be patient. There is something deeply human in that. People build systems they believe will last forever. They carve names, raise walls, change laws, move capitals, break old gods, restore old gods, and tell themselves that memory can be mastered. But memory is less obedient than power imagines. It can sleep inside mud brick. It can hide inside a reused block. It can survive as a gap in a list, a damaged face, a colour on plaster, a bone in a cemetery, a clay tablet from a worried foreign king. It can return without triumph, without revenge, simply by remaining. Akhenaten's world is gone, but not empty. It lingers as a warning and a wonder that light can be used to reveal, and also to blind, that reform can become control, that tradition can preserve, and also erase, that a name can be attacked, yet still cross thousands of years. At Amarna, the sun still rises over the cliffs. It falls on the abandoned horizon of a god, on the broken dream of a king, and on the fragile traces of people who lived inside that dream for a little while. Then the light moves on, leaving the city quiet again, but not silent.